Okay, hello everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name is Grant Fox. I'm the Communications Director at the Democratic Party of Virginia. Today we have our chairwoman, Susan Swecker, and the Democratic Governors Association's Political Director, Marshall Cohen, here to talk about the state of the Virginia governor's race and the Republicans' nominee, Glenn Youngkin. So without further ado, let me kick it over to Susan.
Thank you, Grant, and thank you everybody for hopping on this call today to talk about the state of play of the Virginia governor's race and the nomination yesterday of right-wing extremist Glenn Youngkin on the Republican side. Glenn Youngkin is the epitome of a pro-Trump Republican who has demonstrated complete allegiance to the former president's most dangerous conspiracy theories. Where Trump leads, Glenn follows. Instead of focusing on moving Virginia forward from the COVID pandemic, Youngkin focused his campaign on one thing: proving his loyalty to Donald Trump. Just this morning, we saw Donald Trump offer his full-throated endorsement of Youngkin, a sign that Youngkin's right-wing extremism is exactly in line with Donald Trump. Glenn Youngkin spent the final week of the campaign cozying up to the fringes of the Republican Party, spouting conspiracy theories with Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson. And instead of denouncing Corey Stewart and his horrific white nationalist views, Youngkin embraced his endorsement. To earn the support of the Virginia GOP faithful, Youngkin went all in on Donald Trump's dangerous election lies and conspiracy theories. And to this day, Youngkin refuses to state the fact that Joe Biden won the election. Youngkin has demonstrated complete dedication to the dangerous lie that led to the January 6th insurrection and cost American lives, including Capitol Hill police. The Virginia GOP is bitterly divided right now. Amanda Chase has refused to offer any endorsements, and they've alienated hundreds of thousands of their own voters with a rigged nominating process. Youngkin's central task, consolidating support among Republicans, poses a significant uphill climb. Youngkin will need to continue defining himself with a base whose litmus test is in complete support and loyalty for Donald Trump. Throughout this campaign, Glenn Youngkin has shown Virginians that he is running on a dangerous Republican agenda. Youngkin has steadfastly opposed the COVID-19 relief that has been a crucial lifeline for working families and small businesses across the Commonwealth. While the American Jobs Plan sped up vaccinations, delivered relief to struggling small businesses, and gave millions of Virginians $1,400 checks to weather the pandemic, Youngkin said it was wrong. Youngkin has taken an extremely hard line on health care, railing against Governor Northam's efforts to protect the Affordable Health Care Act and attacking Medicaid expansion. Youngkin's pro-Trump extremism is flat out wrong for Virginia. We're just beginning to move on from this pandemic, and Youngkin is threatening to take us backwards. If he won't even admit that Joe Biden was legitimately elected president, how can Virginians trust him to lead our Commonwealth? Glenn Youngkin doesn't understand the needs of Virginians because he's blinded by fealty to Trump. He will always put himself, his wealthy corporate insider friends, and his Republicans allies in DC before Virginians. Grant, back to you.
Thank you, Susan. Let's kick it to Marshall from the DGA.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks, Susan, and thanks for the great work the Virginia Democratic Party is doing in holding all the Republicans accountable this year. Just a few points from me. First, obviously, the big news this morning of Trump endorsing Republican gubernatorial nominee Glenn Youngkin. I think this helps define him in some ways better than we could ever hope to on day one of the general election. I think it's important to remember that Youngkin's been speaking to 30,000 Republican base voters in order to win this convention. The last gubernatorial election had about 2.6 million people vote and turn out. So this Trump endorsement is going to be the first thing many of these millions of voters learn about Glenn Youngkin, and they're not going to like it. Virginians overwhelmingly voted to get rid of Donald Trump from the White House, and they're not going to put a Trump loyalist like Glenn Youngkin into the governor's office this fall. I also think the speed in which Trump endorsed Youngkin just shows you how much of this convention fight was a dance in order to get the Trump stamp of approval. It really was a Trump litmus and loyalty test, and Youngkin passed with flying colors. I think it is fitting when you look at how Youngkin got the nomination that Amanda Chase's voters were the one that put him over the top. It is reflective of the entire primary process, where the Chase extreme views are now the Republican Party views. Youngkin embraced those views, embraced Trump, and had surrogates like Ted Cruz and Corey Stewart vouching for him. He is beholden to these Republican extremists now. This is the Republican Party, and this is the Glenn Youngkin wing of the Republican Party. I think his loyalty to Trump not only is about style and substance, it is also infecting his policy priorities. He said over the course of the campaign, the number one priority he had as governor was pushing the big lie and restricting voting rights, simply because he refused to acknowledge that Joe Biden won the election and Donald Trump lost the election. That means he does not think Virginians should be caring about things like schools, the economy, healthcare. He only wants to prove his loyalty to Donald Trump. And lastly, the DGA did a poll of Republican primary voters just a week before the nomination fight to get a sense of where Republican voters are. And I think what we're looking at and what proved today with the Trump endorsement is that Youngkin has no ability to pivot to the middle for the general election. His Republican base will demand he stays in that Trump lane because that's who he is. Republicans overwhelmingly have views that are different from those voters across the Commonwealth who will determine the election in the fall. Only 15% of Republicans in this poll believed Biden was legitimately elected president. 75% think that the insurrection on January 6th was a false flag operation organized by Antifa. And when asked whether they wanted their candidate to fully embrace Donald Trump or pivot to the middle, Republicans in Virginia, 84-8, say they want their candidate to embrace Trump. So there is no pivot possible, nor is Glenn Youngkin interested in pivoting, because he has proven through the last couple months his number one loyalty and his number one priority is to Trump, not to Virginia. With that, I'll turn it over to Grant.
Thank you, Marshall. That was excellent. We're going to open it up for questions now. There's a lot of you on the call, and I'm sorry in advance that we won't be able to get to everyone. But if you raise your hand, I can unmute you for a couple questions. All right, Graham from the Virginia Mercury, I'm going to unmute you right now.
Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Graham.
Okay. So I've spoken to several Republicans and Democrats who think that Youngkin was maybe the strongest general election contender of the big four in the Republican field because of his sort of blank slate record and his money and ability to self-fund. So just curious to hear if you guys would agree with that, and where would you slot him on the left-right political spectrum?
So, go ahead.
Go ahead, Marshall. Go ahead, and then I can.
So look, I think we've said all along over the last couple months as we've watched the Republican nomination fight that all of them have proven that their loyalty to Donald Trump above all else makes them unelectable in Virginia. Virginia Republicans have not won a statewide election in over a decade. And I think the Donald Trump era for them has been one of complete disaster. And they have not learned their lesson. They've leaned in hard, not to change the direction that they are heading, but to further go to the right. And so I don't think we think any of those candidates who were in the field were more electable than the rest. I think they all proved themselves unelectable when they decided to put Trump first and Virginia second. I think to those, I can't remember the second part of your question, but I think, it was the left-right divide. Look, I think actions and words are important. And over the last 4 months, you've seen Youngkin throw red meat after red meat at the base Republican voters. Those voters chose him as their nominee because of it, and they're not going to let him pivot to the general election without consequence. And so he has to keep that base vote in his corner in order to have any chance. And by doing that, he makes himself unelectable in the swing electorate in Virginia, across the Commonwealth, who have overwhelmingly said they do not want Donald Trump policies or personalities in Virginia.
And let me just add to that and say simply, I would echo the words of the wise sage of Charlottesville, Larry Sabato, who said, they're all Trump, Trumpier, or Trumpiest. So they've all were just different versions of Trump. So they're all very, very much in line with him, including Glenn Youngkin.
All right, thanks, Graham. If anyone else has a question, they can raise their hand and I'll unmute you. All right, Mel from the RTD, here you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, I'm sorry if you've already spoken about this, but are Democrats ready to compete with Youngkin in terms of finances? Obviously, the amount of money that he could potentially throw out this race is something that's been talked about a lot. Just curious if you have any thoughts right now or concerns about that.
Go ahead, Marshall, and then I'll weigh in.
I have no concerns. I don't think any amount of money is going to change Virginians' minds about who Glenn Youngkin is and why he's put Trump first and Virginia second. I think his actions have alienated and will continue to alienate voters across the Commonwealth. When he pushes the Trump agenda onto Richmond, it's not what people want. I think from a DGA perspective, as we've looked across the country the last number of years, that Republicans who embrace that kind of mentality have not been successful despite fundraising advantages in some places. And so I think it might have helped him in a convention. He obviously went far to the right in order to win it, but it's not going to help him in a general election. And DGA, Democratic Party of Virginia, I know everyone is all aligned to make sure that we're moving Virginia forward and not bringing a Trump loyalist to Richmond.
And I would just add to that I know from the past and have every confidence that we have a record here in Virginia. Virginia voters are very savvy. They're very smart. They're very thoughtful. They're not going to fall for some infusion of money that spews lies and distortions. And the fact is that Glenn Youngkin is opposed Medicaid expansion, something that has helped over 500,000 Virginians all across the Commonwealth, opposed against a minimum wage, criticized all these COVID restrictions and COVID policies that Governor Northam and the trifecta put in place to keep us safe and secure so that we are now able to start opening our economy back up, criticized the American Rescue Plan. He is out of step and out of line with all of Virginia voters, and we will have a chance to contrast that. But make no mistake about it, Virginia voters are really very smart, and I trust them to make a good and strong and thoughtful decision.
Okay, thanks, Mel. Let's take one question. Zach from Politico, I'm gonna unmute you right now.
Hey guys, how's it going? Thank you for doing this. Mel Mel kind of sort of asked the question I was going to, but kind of relatedly, Glenn and Republicans writ large and former President Trump all seem to be in agreement that they're going to be facing Terry McAuliffe. Does the DGA have any intention on going on the defense for Terry, even though he's not the nominee, given that you still have a month to go before you all land on a candidate?
Well, I would just say from the party perspective, we are very proud of all of our candidates that are out there running, and we have already started raising money and to fund a robust Virginia turnout project, which is what our coordinated campaign is. We don't get involved in primaries, but make no mistake about it, last fall, even before the presidential election was over, we started laying the groundwork to be ready to lift up our whole statewide ticket on June 8th once they are elected.
And I would just say from the DGA perspective, Zach, which you know, we don't take sides in primaries, and we're excited to have a nominee on June 8th. I'd like to contrast the way the Democrats are picking a nominee through the primary system, where we're going to have a lot of people engaged and involved. It's going to be very clear the person with the most votes is going to be the nominee. With the way the Republicans chose a nominee, which was a literal backfilled room spread across 37 different sites. And so I think all Democrats are talking about the issues voters care about. I think that's important. Obviously, the Republicans made their entire convention nomination fight a loyalty test to Trump. And for the next couple of weeks until we have a nominee, I know the DGA and the Virginia Democratic Party are going to try to highlight why Glenn Youngkin is the wrong choice. And when we have a nominee, we'll look forward to making that contrast even more. But we know we have a great set of candidates and look forward to working with whoever the nominee is going to be.
Had to try. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks, Zach. All right, I think we got time for just maybe one or two more questions. Let's go to Tripp from the New York Times, and then Brandon, I'll get to you next.
Tripp, we don't hear you yet. You might have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, there I am. Sorry. Democrats in Virginia, were gifted by Trump's being in office for the last 4 years. Huge turnout. You had the gift of Corey Stewart running in 2018. I hear you wanting to link Glenn Youngkin at the hip to Donald Trump, but he was maybe number 3 among the Republican gubernatorial contenders on the Trumpy scale. He's going to be running, criticizing Democratic leadership for, damaging business in Virginia. This is going to be presumably a pitch that a lot of independent voters are open to. Do you really you really think that just yoking him to Trump from now until November is the winning message?
Let me start with that.
Susan in particular, yeah.
Yeah, let me start with it. Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Let me point this out to you all, which you probably already know. The one candidate in the race that said Joe Biden legitimately won the election, Kirk Cox, was roundly a former Speaker of the House, establishment Republican, was roundly taken out. And the ones that did better were the ones that said, questioned, all the others questioned Joe Biden's election. So no, Trump is still on the ballot. Glenn Youngkin has made that very clear. Trump endorsed him today. But let me just say this also. We are very proud of the progress we have made in Virginia these last years, particularly in having the trifecta. So we are going to be able to point to that. Restoration of rights to vote, major voting reforms, Medicaid expansion, raising the minimum wage, justice reform, and much, much more. So we have a very positive message that we are going to run on, but make no mistake about it. We are going to point out every step of the way the right-wing extremism of Glenn Youngkin.
And to be fair, it's not just us that's going to say it. It's going to be the former president himself who put his unwavering endorsement and talked about how they have shared policies and priorities this morning. And so I think what I mentioned before about the Republican base is not going to allow Glenn Youngkin to ignore Donald Trump moving forward. He has no intention of doing that. And I think that is going to continue to be the case. And I would remind folks that in 2017, you guys, a lot of you said the same thing about Ed Gillespie, and he faced a similar challenge. And so we're confident in our ability to have a nominee, to work with them to be successful in the fall, up and down the ticket with the great Democratic Party in Virginia.
Thanks.
Thanks, Trip. All right, I don't see any other hands raised, so I think we're going to wrap it up here. If anyone else has other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Manuel or I, and we'll get back to you. We're going to send around a recording of this call. And thanks again for everyone for tuning in. We'll talk to you later. And thanks again, Marshall and Susan. This was great. Thank you for taking the time.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.